Today, we're talking about a very interesting topic, the 80% rule for English fluency.
Exactly. A lot of people think they need to understand 100% of everything.
Yeah.
But actually, that's not true.
In many cases, understanding around 80% is already enough to communicate and improve your fluency. So today, we're going to explain why this rule works and how it can help you speak English more confidently. We hope you'll enjoy this episode. Yeah.
And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like the video and write your opinion in the comments.
Right now, there are literally millions of people staring at flashcards, deliberately inducing a stress hormone response in their brains.
Yeah, a response that literally prevents them from learning.
Exactly. And we have this really strange cultural expectation that mastering a new language requires, like, brute force.
Right. It's treated like trying to swallow this massive bitter pill without any water.
Yeah, the friction is just incredibly high.
Yeah.
You're deeply uncomfortable, and you just assume that if you aren't miserable and completely overwhelmed, well, you aren't actually making progress.
We culturally equate fluency with suffering. I mean, the assumption is that you just have to grind through textbooks until your eyes blur, you know, just letting the sheer volume of repetitive data eventually force its way into your long-term memory.
But neurobiology paints a completely different picture of how we actually acquire language, right?
But totally. A fundamentally different picture.
Which is wild to think about. What if the actual biological secret to fluency isn't a grammar drill, but, I don't know, watching Paul Blart? Mall Cop.
I love that that's an actual scientific possibility today.
Right. So welcome to today's custom-tailored deep dive. For you listening right now, someone who, loves to gain knowledge efficiently, who wants to understand the underlying mechanics of learning without drowning in information overload, this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you consume media.
It really will.
Our mission today is to crack the code on language acquisition and figure out how to move you from that hesitant, passive understanding to true, confident fluency.
And the stack of sources we're using to deconstruct this process takes us through the entire cognitive journey of language learning.
Yeah, we've got a great stack today.
We really do. We're looking at a comprehensive analysis from Preply that evaluates the best English learning podcasts, specifically some great tools from the BBC and the British Council.
Plus that brand new research paper.
Right. A cutting-edge 2025 linguistics research paper on reading strategies, which was just recently published in Lithuania. And finally, this absolutely ingenious vocabulary breakdown from Inglix that uses, of all things, Hollywood movie quotes to teach the most notoriously tricky part of the English language.
The dreaded phrasal verbs.
The absolute worst.
So let's start with the auditory side of things, specifically that fragile intermediate stage of learning.
The plateau.
Yeah, the B1 and B2 levels. The Preply source points out that for learners at this stage, you are in a highly precarious position. You've conquered the basic grammatical structures. You can, order a coffee,
But you aren't quite ready to seamlessly follow a native-level high-speed debate on economic policy.
Exactly. You're stuck in the middle.
And that intermediate plateau is where the highest abandonment rates occur. I mean, your brain is just desperately trying to bridge the gap between structured classroom dialogue and chaotic real-world conversation.
So to build that bridge, the sources recommend highly curated audio environments. Podcasts like the BBC's 6-Minute English, which is, for people who want high-density learning in a really short window.
Or the British Council's Learn English podcast, which focuses almost entirely on conversational, everyday situations.
Right. But the really interesting thing is that the specific title you choose matters significantly less than the underlying mathematical rule you apply to it.
This is the golden metric from the Preply analysis, the 80% comprehension rule.
The 80% rule?
Yeah. The foundational idea here is that you should ruthlessly curate your listening material so that you already understand about 80% of the vocabulary and grammar being used.
Thinking about this mechanically, it instantly reminds me of lifting weights at the gym.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you go to the gym and pick up a 3-pound dumbbell, let's call that 100% language comprehension. You don't build any new muscle.
Right, you're just waving your arms around.
Exactly. There is no friction, no resistance, and therefore, no adaptation. But if you try to deadlift 500 pounds, let's call that 30% comprehension.
You drop the bar, pull a muscle, and cancel your gym membership.
Bingo. You just quit.
And your brain does the exact same thing when it hits cognitive overload. It just shuts down the workout.
But wait, let me push back on the math here for a second.
Sure.
Why cap it at 80%? If efficiency is the goal, why not drop your comprehension level to, say, 50%? Wouldn't exposing yourself to a massive volume of unknown words all at once force you to learn faster?
I mean, that sounds logical on paper, but it completely ignores how our brains actually handle cognitive load.
Really?
Yeah. When you drop to 50% comprehension, your brain lacks the structural scaffolding required to guess the meaning of the unknown words. You're just missing too many pieces of the puzzle, so the broader picture never forms.
You're just lost in the noise.
Exactly. And when the brain encounters that much unresolved ambiguity, it triggers a literal stress response. Cortisol spikes, frustration sets in, and the neurological pathways required for memory consolidation essentially just lock down.
Wow. So you are actively preventing yourself from learning by trying to learn too much.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But at that 80% mark, you have enough surrounding context to remain engaged. Your brain feels secure.
Because you know most of what's going on.
Right. Because you understand the vast majority of the sentence, your brain can naturally deduce that unknown 20% through contextual clues or, the speaker's tone of voice, logical deduction.
You aren't just memorizing a definition from a textbook.
No, you're solving a micro-puzzle organically, and that act of deduction builds much deeper, much more resilient neural pathways.
Translating this into your daily routine means removing the guilt associated with abandoning a TV show or a podcast that just feels too dense.
Yes, absolutely.
You aren't failing at the language. You've simply drifted out of your 80% optimal growth zone. You really have to treat your media diet like a precisely calibrated instrument.
It is entirely about finding the exact point of resistance where learning is a natural byproduct of engagement rather than this, forced exercise.
But the 80% listening rule has a major blind spot.
Which is?
Audio vanishes the second it's spoken.
True.
You can't just pause a real-life conversation to dissect the structural anatomy of a new phrase. To actually capture and quarantine that unknown 20%, we have to freeze the language in time. And that means shifting our focus from how we listen to how we read.
Which perfectly brings us to the 2025 study by Sakine Mehmedli, published in the Euro Global Journal of Linguistics and Language Education.
I found this study so fascinating.
It really is. It provides fresh, empirical data on how different interactions with static text literally alter our vocabulary acquisition.
So the study tracked 120 intermediate language learners, right?
Yep, 120 students.
And rather than treating reading as a single monolithic activity where you just sort of scan a page, they divided the students to test 3 highly specific strategies: extensive reading, intensive reading, and interactive reading.
And to really understand the data, we need to look at the methodology. The researchers didn't just, ask the students how they felt afterward.
Right, it wasn't a survey.
No, they used rigorous pre- and post-tests to measure both broad reading comprehension and granular vocabulary acquisition against a control group.
Okay, let me guess the dynamic here.
Go for it.
Extensive reading is about volume. Like reading a long novel on the beach where you just let the narrative wash over you.
Spot on.
Intensive reading is slowing down to surgically dissect a short, dense paragraph.
Correct again.
And interactive reading means they were actively discussing the text, maybe debating character motives or predicting the next chapter. Am I on the right track?
You've outlined the mechanics perfectly. And the data from those 3 approaches revealed a fascinating divergence in cognitive outcomes.
What happened?
Well, all 3 experimental groups improved significantly over the control group, which proves that, any structured engagement with text is beneficial.
Sure, reading is always better than not reading.
Exactly. However, the extensive and interactive reading groups demonstrated the absolute best results for overall reading comprehension.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they developed the stamina to grasp the macro-level narrative flow without getting derailed by an unknown word.
So they trained their brains to follow the overarching plot rather than panicking over a single missing piece of vocabulary.
Exactly. But the intensive reading group, the students who literally slowed down to analyze the grammatical architecture of every sentence, they were the undisputed champions of acquiring specific new vocabulary.
Okay, so the strategy you choose entirely dictates the cognitive reward.
100%.
Let's look at the excerpt from the short story provided in our sources to see how this actually works.
Yeah, the nautical story.
Right. The text features some highly specific vocabulary. For example, the word helm, the wheel or handle used to steer a ship, or the word grab to take hold of something suddenly or violently. If you're reading this story, how do you decide which reading strategy to deploy?
Well, it depends entirely on your specific goal for that 10-minute session. If your goal is to build neurological stamina, to get comfortable with the rhythm and cadence of the language, you go extensive.
So you just keep reading.
Right. You might not know the exact definition of helm, but you understand a character is steering a boat through a storm, and you just keep moving. You stay in that 80% flow state.
But if your goal is to actively harvest new words, to move them from passive recognition, where you vaguely know what they mean, into your active vocabulary, where you can actually use them in conversation, you have to shift into intensive mode.
Yes. You stop the flow.
You surgically extract the word grab.
Yeah.
You analyze how it implies suddenness or violence compared to a neutral word like take.
Intensive reading is a deliberate interruption of the narrative to focus on the mechanics of the language.
And this surgical extraction perfectly bridges us to the final piece of the fluency puzzle.
I'm on the boss.
Because if there is one aspect of the English language that absolutely demands intensive reading and relies entirely on mastering that 80% contextual deduction, it's phrasal verbs.
Oh, the linguistic anomaly that haunts every single intermediate learner.
They are completely maddening. I mean, we have to analyze the linguistic bizarreness of what a phrasal verb actually is.
Please do.
You take a standard action verb, you attach a spatial preposition to it, words like up, down, off, or after, and the neurological mapping of the word completely changes. It defies all literal translation.
The adult brain struggles with this so much because it violates established patterns. You know what it means to put a cup on a table?
Right.
You know what the spatial direction of off implies. But when you combine them into put off, meaning to postpone a meeting or delay something, the literal components offer zero clues to the final definition.
None at all. And this is why staring at flashcards of phrasal verbs induces that stress response we talked about earlier. If you try to rote memorize a list of abstract prepositional shifts, your brain has no sensory data to anchor the new definition to. The friction is just too high.
So to solve this, we have to bypass rote memorization entirely. We have to engage the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotion, and link it to the hippocampus, where memories are formed.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, when you combine the intensive reading strategy of isolating a phrase with the 80% comprehension rule and apply it to a medium that provides massive emotional and visual context, learning becomes involuntary.
And the ultimate delivery system for massive emotional and visual context is Hollywood movies.
Cinematic storytelling provides the ultimate neurological superglue.
The Inglex source illustrates this brilliantly. They completely abandon dictionary definitions and instead pair these tricky phrasal verbs with exact quotes from highly recognizable films.
That's such a smart approach.
Let's break down the mechanics of how this works, starting with the phrase cut down on, which means to reduce or decrease.
A highly abstract phrase when viewed in isolation.
Completely. But the source anchors it with a quote from Paul Blart, Mall Cop.
An absolute classic.
Right. So Paul Blart is desperately trying to manage a chaotic situation in the mall. And he says, you see, if we could reroute the customers away from the food court, it's going to help the kiosks and cut down on shopper frustration.
Okay, so let's apply our rules here.
The visual mapping does the heavy lifting. You understand 80% of the scene. He's a stressed security guard. The mall is overcrowded. He wants less chaos.
Exactly. Your visual cortex is processing the dense crowds, your empathy is processing his stress, and your brain effortlessly deducts that cut down on must mean to diminish or reduce.
You haven't just memorized a definition.
No, you've experienced the concept of reduction through a multisensory narrative.
It's brilliant. Let's look at a completely different emotional frequency. The phrase is cheer up, meaning to become happier or to comfort someone. The anchor provided is from the historical drama Downton Abbey.
The contrast in tone is vital here for memory encoding.
Totally. You have the intensely stoic, rigid butler, Mr. Carson, agonizing over a minor staffing issue for a dinner service. He is deeply distressed. Another character looks at him and says, "Cheer up, Carson. There are worse things happening in the world."
Think about the intensive learning happening in that micro moment. You process the severe distress on Carson's face. You process the soothing, perspective-shifting tone of the other character.
The emotional weight.
Yeah, the emotional weight of that specific interaction defines the phrase, cheer up, with a depth that no textbook could ever replicate.
The phrase look after operates on a similar level of visual anchoring. The literal translation, to direct your eyes behind something, is useless.
Completely useless.
The actual meaning is to take care of someone or protect them. And the source uses a scene from The Hobbit. The dwarves are setting up a vulnerable camp in the wilderness, and the leader, Thorin, commands, "Fili, Kili, look after the ponies. Make sure you stay with them."
The environment does the teaching here.
Right.
The viewer sees the dark, threatening forest. They recognize the vulnerability of the animals. They hear the authoritative command handing over responsibility.
The abstract concept of look after is immediately translated into a tangible feeling of protection and duty.
The pop culture reference entirely removes the friction of learning. You are no longer studying a foreign language. You are inhabiting a story.
Let's do one more because it highlights exactly how the 80% rule allows the brain to snap a new concept into place.
Let's hear it.
The phrase is wake up. Now, most people understand this implies stopping sleep, but the source uses a scene from the movie Inception to highlight a deeper contextual usage.
Oh, Inception is a masterclass in utilizing visual metaphors to explain abstract concepts.
It really is. Leonardo DiCaprio's character is trying to explain the deceptive nature of the dream world. He says, well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange.
That is the perfect utilization of the 80% rule.
Right. The viewer understands the broader philosophical conversation about reality versus illusion. Then, the movie provides the intense, visceral visual of DiCaprio physically jolting out of a dream state.
And that sudden shock of reality intrinsically teaches the remaining 20%.
Exactly. The spatial preposition up is no longer just a direction. It is forever neurologically tied to that sudden, jarring return to consciousness.
When we synthesize this entire methodology, we are looking at a radical departure from traditional education.
A total paradigm shift.
You establish your baseline by utilizing the 80% comprehension rule, ensuring your brain is constantly engaged in low-stakes puzzle solving rather than drowning in cortisol.
You consume media that actually holds your attention.
Right. And armed with the insights from the Mebedley study, you know exactly when to let a story wash over you extensively and when to pause, hit rewind, and surgically analyze a phrase.
You stop trying to force the language into your brain, and instead, you build an ecosystem where learning is the unavoidable byproduct of entertainment.
You basically curate an environment that mimics how a child naturally acquires their first language through context, repetition, and emotional resonance.
So let's retrace the cognitive path we've walked today. We started by dismantling the myth that language acquisition requires brute force and suffering.
We did.
Instead, whether you are utilizing a structured tool like the BBC's 6-Minute English or watching a blockbuster film, your non-negotiable metric is the 80% comprehension zone.
From there, we explored the mechanics of reading. We learned that extensive reading is the tool for building narrative stamina,
while intensive reading is the surgical instrument required to harvest complex new vocabulary.
Finally, we applied that surgical approach to the ultimate linguistic puzzle phrasal verbs.
We saw how completely illogical constructions like cut down on or look after instantly transform into unforgettable concepts when you anchor them to the emotional and visual narratives of Hollywood movies.
And, this methodology raises a profound philosophical question for you to consider as you step away from this deep dive today.
Ooh, what's that?
Well, if true language acquisition requires this deep, empathetic, multisensory anchoring, if we only truly internalize idioms by connecting them to human emotion and visual storytelling, it really makes you wonder about the impending future of AI translation.
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating angle.
Right. We are rapidly approaching an era where an earpiece can provide literal, real-time definitions of any language on Earth. But can a perfectly accurate algorithmic translation ever replace the deep cognitive and cultural connection of actually inhabiting another culture's idioms?
That's a great point.
If we outsource the friction of understanding to a machine, do we lose the emotional resonance that makes language meaningful in the first place?
It suggests that learning the language is less about data transfer and more about expanding your capacity for human connection.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this custom deep dive. We hope it gave you some amazing new tools for your learning journey. Keep questioning the process, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.